I hesitated before discussing any aspect of the Nicola Bulley case, as it's a recent death that occasioned much wild speculation, which must have been very distressing for those who knew her. Also, making any sort of comparison to the Ripper murders might be seen as being in bad taste. But there are aspects which have close parallels and which are vital for understanding the case then and the case now, and the way, in particular, how the police behave. I will start by briefly outlining the Nicola Bulley case. She was a 45-year-old woman who disappeared on the 27th of January after dropping her two daughters off at a local school. She was seemingly normal and in a calm mood. She went to walk her dog in the nearby village of St Michael's on the Wyre in Lancashire, which is not very far from Blackpool, just to locate the place. Up to the time she actually walked her dog in a field on a riverside path by the River Wyre, many of her movements were captured on CCTV cameras. While walking her dog at 9:01 a.m, she logged onto a conference call on her mobile phone in connection with her work as a mortgage advisor. She was last seen at about 9:10 a.m. Her phone, still logged in, although the call had finished, was found on a bench by the river at 9:33 a.m. Her dog, which was dry, and the dog's lead were both nearby. Nicola was nowhere to be seen. The police were called, and very quickly they made it clear that they believed that Nicola had somehow or another ended up in the river. And they also made it very clear that they did not believe any foul play was involved or any other party. The river and the surrounding area were searched, but as the days passed and the body had not been found, questions were raised by the press and particularly on social media. Why hadn't the police treated the bench and the surrounding area as a potential crime scene? It had not even been taped off. Very quickly, as the case gained greater and greater media coverage, a macabre form of tourism arose, with selfies being taken on the bench and drones being used to film the location, for example. The mainstream media and social media sleuths began second-guessing the police investigation. Why were the police focused solely on the river? How did they know that Nicola hadn't been abducted, and so on? The river and the surrounding area was searched repeatedly and also by specialists outside dive teams that came in and also searched the river. They searched the estuary also, where the Wyre came into the sea, which was over 10 miles off, to see if the body could have been found there. The independent dive team declared that she was not in the river. Then on the 19th of February, over 3 weeks after she had disappeared, two walkers found a body caught in the reeds and brambles and some undergrowth on the riverbank, about a mile downstream from that bench. Within a day it was declared that this was Nicola. Actually, this didn't stop the speculation and murder theorists who are still trying to solve the case via Google Maps. The River Wyre in that area is meandering, which means there'll be shallow and deep parts on the curves and bends. There'll be parts that naturally have a stronger current than others. There are quite a lot of trees on the bank, so there'll be branches and other obstacles under the surface. Rainfall will affect the current and depth of the river, which will fall and rise. The Wyre is prone to bad flooding. An object will not necessarily move downstream quickly. It might move a distance, get caught up. Rainfall might push it down a bit. It might get caught up again somewhere else, and so on, with the ebb and flow of the river. A mile of open natural water is a very big space, so it's not entirely surprising that it took that amount of time for the body to be found. As I said, the police and their investigation came under a lot of very public scrutiny and criticism. Why were they doing this? Why didn't they do that? The police do not react very well to ordinary citizens, social media users for example, criticising them en masse. They can't tell them to move on or they're nicked. Their authority becomes impotent and their ability to bully, frankly, becomes zero. In the face of criticism, the police often don't know how to react appropriately. They're not used to these situations. The police responded in this case by releasing self-justificatory private information about the missing person, literally to justify their actions. Releasing this information did not help find Nicola. It never could have. All it could do is tell the country that the police were right in their actions, and a confident, sensible police force wouldn't need to do that. The police released information that she had problems with alcohol and mental health issues due to the menopause, and that the police and health workers had been called to her house a couple of weeks before her disappearance. Clearly the police were hinting that they had information that Nicola Bulley had committed suicide by drowning, but by choosing this way of doing it they caused great distress. Almost certainly the police did have information which gave them very good grounds to believe she had committed suicide by drowning in the river. The police's behaviour in this case is under review as I make this film. Now let's go back to 1888. By the way, some people have commented that I don't allow enough time for people to properly read any text I might put up or follow links that I might provide. If you wish to reread or read more carefully any text that I do put up, then the solution is to pause the film, which is easy enough to do, and then I don't have to disrupt the flow for others. But fully understanding the text is vitally important, not least in this particular film. Anyway, let's move on. So Charles Warren, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, was forced to resign his post at the height of the river murders on the 8th of November 1888, coincidentally the day before the murder of Mary Jane Kelly. You get people who say that Warren's resignation was not related to the river murders, but this is utter nonsense. In the early hours of the morning of the 30th September 1888, immediately after the murder of Catherine Eddowes at Mitre Square, part of her bloodied apron was found nearby in a doorway on Galton Street. It was located immediately under some chalk graffiti that famously read, "The Jews, the men who will not be blamed for nothing." There is some dispute as to the exact wording and the nature of the handwriting, the size, the type of script, the location on the wall, because although some policemen present wanted to photograph it as potential evidence and they were waiting for it to get light so this could be carried out, Warren, who came to the scene to see what had happened, authorised that the graffiti be washed from the wall before a photograph could be taken. This was said to be on the advice of Superintendent Arnold, who was a senior officer of H Division in the Metropolitan Police, in which district the graffiti and the apron had been found. This is Galton Street. It's part of the area known as Petticoat Lane Market, and market traders had been arriving and were curious about the police activity in Galton Street, which was literally where those people are, by that doorway. Supposedly there was fear that there would be that the people would see this wording and it would cause an anti-Semitic riot, as there were a large number of Jews living in this vicinity. Why they couldn't just have cordoned that small area off around the doorway is anybody's guess. And very soon afterwards, the wording of the graffiti became common knowledge anyway, and there was no anti-Jewish riot. So Superintendent Arnold's fears were totally misplaced. The folly of washing the graffiti from the wall right here before it could be photographed, and the shallow reasons for doing it, also excited various conspiracy theories, such as that the graffiti held a secret Masonic meaning, But to tell the truth, this angle was of more recent provenance, and I'm pretty sure that it wasn't suggested by contemporary sources. But Warren's authorisation in person of the removal of this graffiti led to considerable public criticism of him and highlighted the inability of the Metropolitan Police to catch the culprit. Warren resorted to a self-justificatory article published in the November issue of Murray's magazine, in which he attempted to explain in self-justification how he was running the Metropolitan Police in general and the Ripper inquiry in particular. As a public official, Warren should have obtained permission from the Home Secretary before providing a lengthy interview, and as a consequence he was forced to resign. This is a link to the debate in the House of Commons about Warren's resignation for anyone who wants to read into it. Why did Warren write the Murray article? Undoubtedly because he was unaccustomed to public scrutiny from the press and in the House of Commons. As a senior army officer, as a member of the patrician class, and as the most senior policeman in the country, he was not used to being second-guessed, and he was impotent to silence his critics. He was in unfamiliar territory. He could not bully or order the arrest of the various journalists or politicians who lampooned his perceived incompetence. So Warren reacted by blabbing inappropriately in public, just as the police did in the Nicola Bulley case. I'll now move on to another example in the Whitechapel murders of the police blabbing, or more charitably in this instance, responding to public criticism and to the press second-guessing the police and indeed running their own parallel investigation. This, again, is very similar to the Nicola Bulley case and has, I believe, the same reason behind it. The example I will give now is also of great significance to the case in general and the case against Charles Lechmere. And so inevitably the nature of this matter is deliberately and frankly maliciously misdirected, distorted and garbled by critics of the Lechmere theory. I refer to an interview given by the police on the night of Saturday the 2nd of September 1888, soon after the murder of Polly Nichols and the day after the inquest into her death had commenced. To understand this case, this interview must be studied in detail, and I'm afraid concentration is required. The interview was printed in a lot of newspapers. For example, the full version of the interview was covered in the following newspapers, and this list isn't exhaustive: The Globe, the Daily News, the Manchester Courier, the Bristol Mercury, the Western Daily Press, the Western Supermare Gazette and General Advertiser, the Cambridge Daily News, the Eastern Evening News and Pall Mall Gazette only printed the first part, and a truncated version of the second half was in the Times. The Evening Standard had a brief summary of the first part, and there's also a very brief version in the Echo. So this wasn't a report that was in a couple of obscure papers. It was very widely covered and has very good provenance as a result of that. I'll divide the full interview up into 3 sections to make it easier for you to digest, and we'll see that each section flows on from the one before as the person who gave the interview, Inspector Helson, developed his argument. Inspector Helson, at an interview yesterday evening, said that the report that bloodstains were found leading from Brady Street to Bucks Row was not true. The place was examined by Sergeant Enright and himself on Friday morning, and neither bloodstains nor wheel marks were found to indicate that the body had been deposited where found, the murder being committed elsewhere. Both himself and Inspector Aberline, indeed, had come to the conclusion that it was committed on the spot. That conclusion was fortified by the post-mortem examination made by Dr. Llewellyn. At first, the small quantity of blood found on the spot suggested that the woman was murdered in a neighbouring house. Dr. Llewellyn, however, is understood to have satisfied himself that the great quantity of blood which must have followed the gashes in the abdomen flowed into the abdominal cavity. But he maintains his opinion that the first wounds were those in the throat, and they would have effectively prevented any screaming. The blood from those wounds, Inspector Helson considers, was held by the dress and ulster, and is evident from that view of the matter that the woman was lying on her back when her throat was cut. We see that this statement was given in an interview by Inspector Helson, who was in J Division of the Metropolitan Police, based in Bethnal Green Police Station, on the evening of Saturday the 2nd of September. And the location of Bethnal Green Police Station is behind us, and I imagine him standing on those steps giving this interview. This section primarily dismisses claims that there was a blood trail from Brady Street to the crime scene at Bucks Row. There had been claims in the press that there was such a blood trail. The police denied this several times, so no doubt they were getting very annoyed. There had also been suggestions in the press that Polly Nichols had been murdered elsewhere and the body was left on Bucks Row. The relative lack of blood at the crime scene was referenced to support this theory. Inspector Helson, citing the support of his colleague Inspector Aberline and the examining doctor, Dr. Llewellyn, explained why there was little blood and why the murder had to have been committed on the spot. I will now proceed to the second section, in which Helson continued to set out why it was unlikely that the victim was killed elsewhere, with reference this time to the timescale involved. It is, moreover, considered unlikely that the woman could have entered a house, have been murdered, and have been removed to Bucks Row within a period of an hour and a quarter. The woman who last saw the deceased alive, and whose name is Nellie Holland, was a fellow lodger with the deceased in Thrall Street, and is positive as to the time being 2:30. Police Constable Neal, 79J, who found the body, reports the time as 3:45. Bucks Row is a comparatively secluded place, having tenements on one side only. There is little doubt that the constable was watched out of the street on his previous round. He's been severely questioned as to his working of his beat on that night, and states that he was last on the spot when he found the body not more than half an hour previously, that is to say at 3:15. This section sets out the period from which Polly was last seen alive at 2:30 by Nellie or Emily Holland, to when the body was found by PC Neal, which according to him was at 3:45 a.m. The significant section here is that Inspector Helson, on the evening of Saturday the 2nd of September, unequivocally regarded PC Neal as being the person who first found the body of Polly Nichols. He said, Police Constable Neal, 79J, who found the body. This is in line with the initial reports that appeared on the afternoon of the murder on Friday the 31st of August and on the morning of Saturday the 1st of September. And these can have only been the result of police statements. It is in line with the inquest testimony of PC Neal on the first day of the inquest in the Working Lads Institute, which was also on the 1st of September. It is also in line with the initial police report we have, dated the 31st of August, the very day of the murder. All these accounts, up to the interview given by Inspector Helson on the evening of Sunday the 2nd of September, are unanimous that PC Neal found the body and no one else. This proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Charles Lechmere's involvement in the murder was totally unknown to the police until after Inspector Helson's interview on the evening of Sunday the 2nd of September. The narrative only changed after Monday the 3rd of September, when Lechmere appeared at the second day of the inquest and testified. Obviously, when Lechmere testified, he used the name Charles Cross, and he claimed that he was the person who first discovered the body with Robert Paul. Charles Lechmere obviously didn't admit to killing Polly Nichols, but Helson's interview proves that Lechmere delayed in coming forward by about 3 days. The earliest Lechmere can have come forward was on the night of Sunday the 2nd of September, after Helson had given his interview. But it seems more probable that it was on the morning of the 3rd of September, on his way to work, when he could have either gone to a police station to give a statement or gone directly to the inquest and given a statement there. Now, under the Coroner's Act of 1887, there was no requirement for a summons to be issued to enable anyone to testify. I mentioned this in an earlier film, quoting the relevant legislation, but because critics of the Lechmere theory rely on misinformation, I will do it again. There was categorically no necessity for Lechmere to have received a summons for him to have appeared as a witness. The summons was designed to enforce attendance where it was believed that the witness may not attend. The coroner, being appraised of this new evidence, would have been the person to ask Lechmere to testify, and this can only have happened on the morning of the 3rd of September, shortly before the inquest reconvened. Anyway, let's now look at the third and final part of Inspector Helson's interview. The beat is a very short one, and quickly walked over would not occupy more than 12 minutes. He neither heard a cry nor saw a soul. Moreover, there are 3 watchmen on duty at night close to the spot, and neither one heard a cry to cause alarm. It is not true, says Constable Neal, who is a man of nearly 20 years' service, that he was called to the body by 2 men. He came upon it as he walked, and flashing his lantern to examine it, he was answered by the lights from 2 other constables at either end of the street. These officers had seen no man leaving the spot to attract attention, and the mystery is most complete. Nevertheless, the utmost efforts are being used. A number of plainclothes men are being out making inquiries in the neighbourhood, and Sergeants Wright and Godley have interviewed many persons who might, it was thought, assist in giving a clue. Inspector Helson categorically denied that PC Neal was called to the scene by 2 men. He stated that PC Neal found the body independently. This amplified the earlier comment that I quoted in my second section above. Police Constable Neal, 79J, who found the body, reports the time at 3:45. So there we have it. On 2 separate occasions in this one interview, Inspector Helson confirms that as far as he and the police were concerned, up until the evening of Sunday, the 2nd of September, PC Neal, and PC Neal alone, had discovered the body. Lechmere was a totally unknown quantity. There can be no doubt whatsoever that Lechmere delayed in coming forward. Just as the earlier comments by Helson had been prompted by press speculation, the running of parallel investigations and second guessing of the police about blood trails and the location of the murder, there had also been press claims that someone had found the body before PC Neal, and clearly this section was dealing with this matter. Although in this instance the police denial was found to be incorrect soon afterwards. A press account of the body having been discovered before PC Neal arrived first appeared in a few provincial newspapers on Saturday the 1st of September. The story was seemingly attributed to the Star, a London-based evening newspaper. It claimed that two passers-by found the body and one of them went off to find PC Neal and brought him to the scene. Two late editions of the Star from the 31st of August have been found, and this story doesn't appear in either of them. Logically then, the story can only have been in an early edition, and if so, it must have been dropped in its later editions. Alternatively, the story may have been wired out by the Star, and for some reason they decided not to use it themselves. The Star was quite critical of the police. I've included some of their commentary about Warren earlier. The only sensible reasons why they could have dropped the story was because they realised that PC Neal made no reference to his being called to the body by other people. Now, there was a degree of ambiguity over the discovery of the injuries to Polly Nichols. After she had been taken to the mortuary, two elderly inmates from a local workhouse called Hatfield and Mann stripped the body, uncovering Polly's abdominal wounds, and raised the alarm as to these previously undiscovered wounds. Possibly the supposed Star story was a garbled version of this discovery of the abdominal wounds by two people. The second story that appeared in the press about the body being discovered before PC Neal was in Lloyd's weekly newspaper, which appeared on the Sunday, the very day of the Helson interview. This issue also extensively covered the blood trail story and the theory that she had been murdered, that Polly had been murdered elsewhere and the body later dumped at Bucks Row, which, as we've seen, the police had already tried to put to bed. It seems likely that this edition of Lloyd's weekly newspaper, a newspaper which claimed to have the biggest circulation of any newspaper in the world at the time, and so had considerable influence, was the final catalyst for Helson giving his interview. This second story was the remarkable statement by Robert Paul, in which he stated that he saw a man standing where the woman was. This man was Charles Lechmere, and I would suggest that the appearance of this story on Sunday the 2nd of September prompted Lechmere to come forward to testify at the inquest on the next day, the 3rd of September. This is the significance of this whole matter. We see that Lechmere came forward 3 days late, and only after the publication of Robert Paul's statement which implicated him. And Lechmere would obviously know that both Robert Paul and Jonas Musen would have been able to identify him. As it turned out, the police denied the veracity of Robert Paul's statement, but this didn't appear in the press until the next day, by which time Lechmere had come forward. Lechmere's confirmation of Paul's story, which up to that time had been dismissed, meant that Paul himself was then, and only then, the subject of a police search, and he was eventually found. Incidentally, it's obviously impossible for Paul to have been located by the police prior to the Helson interview, as otherwise Helson would not have insisted that PC Neal was the first finder. And I'll clear up one other issue that's been the cause of some confusion. Robert Paul's statement cannot have prompted the story that was attributed to the Star, the one that I just discussed a short while ago. This is because we know that Paul gave his interview on his way home from work on the evening of Friday the 31st of August. This means that a Star reporter cannot have overheard Paul's account or somehow obtained a garbled version of it, as the story, if it appeared in the Star at all, must have been in one of their early editions. In other words, one of their editions that appeared before Paul had even given his statement to Lloyd's. Nor would the Star have been able to wire provincial newspapers for them to print up the sale by Sunday morning had they obtained the story in the evening via Paul. This is because they would have had to get their notes back to their office, write them up, wire them out for them to be received by these provincial newspapers before their print deadline for Saturday morning. And then the Star would have not even bothered to print up this information that they had obtained in their Sunday edition and gone to all that trouble about. So it just is a non-starter. It just makes no sense, which is why the Star story cannot have been based on Paul's account, but must have been either a totally false rumour, and false rumours abound in cases like this, or it is loosely based on the Hatfield and Mann discovering of the abdominal wounds. Further, the story must have appeared in an early edition and was dropped, or it was wired out early on and they dropped it before they went into print in their own newspaper. Be that as it may, the supposed Star story probably did contribute to Helson's exasperation at being second guessed by the press over Neil being the first finder of the body. To return to Inspector Helson's interview, it also states that PC Neil signalled the officers at either end of Bucks Row to summon them to the scene, PC Thane at Brady Street and PC Misen on Bakers Row. However, we know that PC Misen had been told that he was needed in Bucks Row by Lechmere, which means that PC Neil must have been unaware of this. Then we have the interesting remark with reference to PCs Thane and Misen. These officers had seen no man leaving the spot to attract attention. PC Thane had seen no one, so far as we know. But PC Misen had seen and spoken to Lechmere near this very location that I'm standing in now, and Paul was in company with him. Clearly, to Misen, these two did not attract his attention in any possibly remotely guilty manner. PC Misen was to claim that he regarded them, Lechmere anyway, as a messenger from another officer, which would fit the statement that he had seen no one to attract attention. This interview by Inspector Helson was one of the last times that the police in the Ripper case gave such a detailed and official public account on the case. They effectively stopped commenting as the case went on, and that in itself excited criticism in the press. And it's also annoying for historians or for ripperologists, but understandable, as actually it was a more professional approach. Perhaps one reason why the police stopped giving interviews was that Helson's strong assertion that PC Neil had found the body was proved wrong the very next day, and the whole official narrative of how the body of Polly Nichols was discovered had to be changed 3 days after her murder. The motivation behind Helson's interview, which is crucial in understanding the Ripper case, was clearly prompted by press stories, where the press were trying to run their own parallel investigations, just as Warren's Murray article was prompted by criticism of Warren and his handling of the Ripper case. And today we have seen in the Nicola Bulley case the police act in exactly the same manner. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and share.